Hello everybody, Kelly Rice here, but I write under my pen name K.M. Rice, which are my initials. No surprise there. I hope you guys are doing well. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you even more for commenting and submitting your questions and keeping this video blog alive and well, because I wouldn't be here without you. Quick note to anyone who might be trying to help me by repeatedly clicking ads or anything like that you see on my YouTube videos, I ask for you to please refrain from doing that, even though you may have the best of intentions. I recently just had to go through a thing with Google where they accused me of fraudulent activity because of invalid clicks, and it wasn't something I was doing, and they told me that I was responsible somehow for the actions of the people who watch my videos, which doesn't make any sense. But I thought I would throw that out there just in case one of you, like I said, was trying to help me. It's fine to click on the ads if you're interested, but I think what they flag is people who are like tick, 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 and refreshing the videos and clicking each time or something. I don't know. Anyway, welcome. Today's question is from Jane Alvin. And Jane asks, how do you world build? Do you create the worlds and their rules before the story? Or do your stories shape the worlds? Okay. I hate having to do this when I answer one of your questions, but I'm gonna have to make some references to one of my books that is not out yet. And again, I don't like doing that for obvious reasons because you won't have a clear understanding of what I'm talking about, so I will do my best to explain. I will, however, also use Darkling as an example because that is the most popular book that I have out. I'm guessing several of you have read it. If not, you can buy it on Amazon and you can read it soon so that you know what I'm talking about, or at least read the description, something. And I just want to thank my sister for giving me this shirt as a hand-me-down, because it's, oh, you can't see it. It's got this cute trim and everything. Now you just saw part of my stomach. I'm sure you'll survive. But as I used to say in these vlogs, when I first started it about a year ago when the weather was warm, today's a fairly warm day, I don't go out much. So I've got cute clothes that I don't really wear because the rest of the time I'm just like in my t-shirt at home and in sweatpants, which I may or may not be wearing right now because you can't see my lower half. But this vlog is an excuse for me to look kind of nice and put on a bit of makeup and all that. Now, on to world building. As I believe I referenced in my episode on the writing process, the very first book that I actually wrote, and by that I mean actually wrote and completed, was the book that I turned in as my thesis for my Master of Fine Arts program at San Jose State University. I had actually been working on a different book prior to that, and this other one, see, this is why this is going to be such a convoluted answer. This other book that I ended up writing and turning in was 90,000 words, and I wrote it in 2.5 weeks, and it was inspired by a dream. Now I'm telling you this because, like I just mentioned, I was originally working on a completely different manuscript that I was going to turn in as my master's thesis or Master of Fine Arts thesis for graduation. It was, like everything I write, something with some fantasy, some whimsy in it, but it was a far more serious piece because I felt like that's what I had to do, and I was having difficulty writing it because I felt the pressure of my classmates' judgment and the pressure of this person who's imaginary, who I like to refer to as the apathetic old white man. Because to me, everyone's striving to write the next great American novel who was in the program with me, at people with these incredibly awesome ambitions that I just didn't have. What they were actually just trying to do is join the ranks of Hemingway and his ilk, and that is what I call the old apathetic white man's club. And I'm sorry, that club is so full. Like, there's a lot of guys in there, and I'm not a guy, and I don't want to be an apathetic old white man. Believe it or not. So I didn't really have any ambition to join it. However, I was feeling a little bit of pressure from that point of view that I needed to write something that had high literary values that gave insight into the suffering of the human condition. And I'm sure you have to throw a reference to male impotence in there to get into the club for real. And you have to be borderline misogynistic, definitely misanthropic, and alcohol and tobacco, those have gotta be basically characters in the story. So I would see literally this old guy with a pipe. He sounds like Tolkien, but he's not, he's a jerk. Though Tolkien probably would have hated my writing. And I would feel him reading over my shoulder being like, shit. Your writing's shit. Apparently he's British too. You could do so much better. Or I could read so much better. So with all this pressure on me, I was doing strange things, which I still do. I think it's a coping mechanism of mine. I was cleaning a lot. I was cleaning the house. The house got very clean while I was supposedly writing my thesis. I literally had a sponge one day and was scrubbing the walls. I mean, like, who does that? And what I don't think I realized was not only was I fighting against trying to force myself to tell a story I didn't really want to tell, but part of my subconscious was like, you're right, that? We don't do that. I'm gonna give you something we do. I'm gonna give you a fucking party. So, what ended up happening, towards the end of that summer, and so I would have been graduating almost a year from then, went to bed one night, and I had this dream. It was one of those dreams that stick with you for a long time afterwards. And again, if you're a regular viewer of this vlog and you remember everything I say, you have a better mind than me. I cannot ever remember anything I say. I just have a vague recollection that in my episode, The Writing Process, I probably discussed this. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. So this dream was the type that when you wake up, you have an intense emotional reaction. In fact, I have a little post-it piece of paper that I scribbled the details of the dream on, and I've kept it, and it's very dear to me now, even though it's totally faded because I wrote it in pencil on hot pink paper. But I had this intense dream that was the end of a story. And I did see a glimpse of a world other than ours. And you know how in dreams, it is kind of like watching a movie. You just... No, it's better than watching a movie because you instinctively intuit all of these things about the world that you're in. You come with foreknowledge without having foreknowledge, for lack of a better word. For lack of a better way of explaining myself. I know you guys know what I'm talking about because you're all dreaming things. We all dream. Whether we remember our dreams or not is another matter, but most of us can remember at least a handful of vivid dreams that we've had in our lifetimes. So I had this dream that I was all of a sudden in this world and I was watching this scene play out that was the end of a story, and it was very moving to me. And it lasted for days, this attachment, and as I went about my daily life and took care of the kids I was taking care of and did all that stuff, moments would come to me, not of the dream, but of things that could have happened in the story to lead up to that point. So your question, Jane, was about world building. In that instance, my subconscious or my imagination, however you want to put it, was laying the groundwork for the world before I started telling the story. But it's difficult to say that because, obviously, I had a portion of the story cemented in my imagination ahead of time. So I think that the easiest answer is that, for me, they often go in tandem. Yeah, like I said, I was going about my daily life. I kept seeing, there's this in that world. You know, it was almost like, and I know I've made this analogy before, Michelangelo, Michelangelo the Great, he once had a quote, and I'm sure this is not verbatim, that he did not sculpt. He had a block of marble, and the figure, the statue, was there within it all along. He was just uncovering it. That's what it felt like to him. That's how it often feels to me with these stories, especially when they come from a surge of inspiration, like what I'm describing to you from a dream, or from something that has motivated me beyond the normal flash in the pan type of impulse. So I felt like I was sort of every once in a while getting a little glimpse into this other world. And again, I don't take notes, so a lot of these things were just cementing in my imagination, and I was just kind of using them to form something more cohesive. I remember the day that I started work on this book. I had an hour to kill, I think, before relatives came over. And I was like, oh, I'll steal this little bit of time to just start writing. I'm just messing around, seeing what kind of story is going to come out of me, leading to this world, leading to this end that I witnessed. And I started writing, and I had a lot of fun, and it kept going, and it kept going. And I remember my cousin was staying with us for a week or something, and so I'd hang out with my siblings and my cousin and do stuff in the day, then at night, like for that little like half-hour window or hour window of time before I got too tired to write anymore, I would work on this thing that was quickly becoming a book. And that then turned into, as I described in my other vlog, the writing process, one of the strangest experiences of my life, because how I was just saying, parts of my imagination were obviously working on this and building little pieces of the world without being fully in the front of my mind, without being in my consciousness. I kind of lost myself in that subconscious space. So, someone who recently watched my writing process episode commented that what I'm describing almost sounds like a mania, like manic depressive form of mania, like a clinical mania. I don't think that would be an accurate description because it isn't a psychological or a clinical condition, but it is a mental space that I'm able to go into when I need to. But it's also a choice and a luxury, because if I know I have the time, I can break myself out of it with effort. But this time, it was the first time it had ever happened to me, and I was completely lost. It's a lot like being drunk. I get into this phase, I got into this phase when I was writing this book, where I was writing probably 10,000 words a day, and I was on the adventure of a lifetime with my characters. It's a much more episodic book. It's for a younger audience, and I think it is somewhat episodic, probably, because if you were to chart it, every morning I would wake up and go, what's going to happen today? I know! And that would become the new little adventure on the greater path of obviously the whole storyline. But it was like being drunk in terms of I could function perfectly throughout the day, but it took effort. It took this really big strain, because all my mind wanted to do was keep telling this story and to keep writing and to stay in this world. And so eating becomes a chore, brushing your teeth becomes a chore. Everything menial that's in the way of you and storytelling becomes something that almost feels insurmountable. And that aspect, unfortunately, no matter how many books and scripts I've written, that stays. So maybe I am clinical. I don't know. I don't think... Maybe something exists that only gets triggered when you're being creative. I'm not sure. I think it's just more likely being very heavily in your right side of your brain, in the creative side of your brain. It's very well documented in studies of creativity that you enter this place they call the zone. So athletes do it. I used to play soccer all the time, and every once in a while I was lucky enough to get into the zone where I am aware of where all of my teammates were, where the ball was, and what all the potential patterns were. It's almost like you're out of your body and you're just one with this group. And that's an awesome feeling to have. Artists experience it all the time. You're working on an art piece and all of a sudden 5 hours have gone by. I have experienced that myself with my art. It's not something that I do that often anymore, but I remember that there was this one time I was doing just a charcoal pencil drawing, and yeah, that happened. I was like 14, and all of a sudden it was dark out, and I had no concept that much time had gone by. That's because you're in a region of your brain that is not monitoring these signals. Language is in the other side of your brain. So, which doesn't make sense when you're writing, because you're using language, but it does make sense in the fact that you're creating and writing even though we're using words, it's highly visual and descriptive. We're trying to convey images and emotions and sights and sounds that we are almost tangibly experiencing as the storytellers. At least at the height of your creativity, that's what it's like. So if I am writing and my sister kindly knocks on the door and steps inside to ask if I would like to go have lunch with her, that just destroyed my flow. That just destroyed what I was working on, because not only did she redirect my mind to something menial and redirect my mind to the here and now when maybe I was in 1917, she just engaged the language portion of my brain that I then had to assess and reply to her with. It's far worse, I think, when you're doing an actual art piece, because you can be completely void of language. And I'll tend to listen to music that has no lyrics if I'm doing something like that. And but the moment the language side of your brain gets triggered again, then it wrenches from the left side to the right, and it causes this shift that really does break your flow. So that's a random little tangent, kind of going into some of the psychology that I think is going on when we're in these heightened creative states. And that was definitely the state that I was in. I described it at the time as feeling like my head was a beehive, and that each bee was an idea or a different facet of the story that I was telling, and they were buzzing constantly. And when I was writing the story, I was in the hive, and I was hanging out with the bees, and it was wonderful. And when I had to go make a burrito, or when I had to go do something more menial, then I had to shove the bees to the back of my head and focus on what was in front of me, but constantly I would hear bzzz, and every once in a while a little bee would escape and be like, hey, I thought of it. I was like, shh, go back into the hive, not yet. So when I wrote that first book, I realized I was carrying this intense burden, and it was difficult for me to navigate through this new psychological experience until I was about halfway through. And it wasn't until afterwards I looked back and I understood that it became easier, because about halfway through I had a very good idea of what the world was, what the rules were, and who all the main characters were, and what role they had to play in the story. So that's why I say that it goes in tandem, because I was creating the world at the same time as I was telling the story, even though some of the world rules had been laid down ahead of time. And it wasn't until I had that made clear, in my own imagination even, and put a lot of it on the page, that my imagination then was able to relax to the point that it became a more tolerable experience, not for me, but for the people around me, because, like, I just become this troll in my room. And, I mean, I look nice right now. I've got some makeup on, and I'm sitting in a little patch of sunlight, and I might look like, I don't know, this is how I live every day, but it's not. Like I said, I'm wearing sweatpants, and I'm usually just in a baggy t-shirt. If you're lucky, I'll put on a bra. I'm not even wearing one right now. So, my actual daily life is, you know, I work from home, okay? I'm a freelancer, and obviously an independent author, and a vlogger. So, my point is, I could get probably even more trollish, I imagine, when I'm in that crazy state. And, oh, I'm running out of space. Hang on. Sorry about that. I was about to run out of space on my memory card, so I had to delete an old vlog episode. So, to go back to the question, and to repeat what I was just saying, yes, it is. World building is something that goes hand in hand with the storytelling, and I find that when that is the case, I feel like I have more control, because if I need something to happen for the story, then I can have it happen, but then I'm allowed to edit myself. And that's where I think the true danger comes in of world building willy-nilly as you tell the story. Because the second half of Jane's question was, does the storytelling shape the world? Well, it did in a way in Darkling. Darkling was not a book that I intended to be any more than this. Than this cover to this cover. It was a standalone. Now, however, I have written a companion novel to go along with it called The Watcher. So that will come out this summer. Keep your eyes peeled. But because it was a standalone novel, I was a little bit more free with having the rules of the world exist to serve the story within reason, because again, there was, and I don't even remember who said this, there was another great artist who thought that his greatest work was from restriction, and he had a teaspoon of paint and had to do a painting, and he felt that it turned out to be one of his greatest paintings because he had that self-imposed, or maybe someone made him do it, I don't know, restriction. And I have found that that is often true. When you force yourself to make a story work within the rules that you've created for your world. And when I'm talking about world, I should have said this earlier to clarify, when I'm talking about world, when I was referring to the first book that I wrote, where I went kind of crazy writing it, I was literally building a world separate from ours for the story. Darkling, you could argue, is also a world separate from ours. There are no place indicators that would say that it was, that it's in our world. Lord of the Rings, obviously, that's on the other end of the spectrum. That's world building. Star Wars, that's world building. You're coming up with cultures, histories, civilizations, settings, the Force, magic. These things all are facets of these different worlds. But when I'm saying world building too, it can be as simple as a town you haven't been to that you're setting the world of your story in. It can be as simple as you know, maybe you're writing something that's a bit more like magical realism, and everything is just like the here and now except for that one thing. Well, that one thing makes it a world apart from our world. And that one twist is what you're going to have to navigate and figure out what are the rules about it, because you've got to have rules. You've got to have limitations. If you don't, you end up like Once Upon a Time. That's right. I said it. Once Upon a Time. That started off of, oh, it'll just be some of these fairy tale characters based on Grimm's fairy tales that Disney has created films about. And then we're just gonna kind of go after everything in the public domain, and we're gonna bring in Peter Pan, and we're gonna bring in all these other IPs that like have nothing to do with anything, and then we're gonna break the rules of our own magic so that you're confused and you're sitting there in a nerd rage going, I'm not watching this anymore, and you're turning it off like I did. Deep breaths. Apologize to anyone still watching Once Upon a Time who really likes it. You're welcome to challenge me in the comments. I just feel that their world building got a little willy-nilly. Same thing happened to Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow started off really strong, and then all of a sudden their rules stopped applying. The limitations stopped applying. It's a very basic storytelling tool. And so many action-adventure TV shows and books do this. You put your character in a near-death situation, and the first time that happens, the first time that character's jeopardized, you're scared, and you're worried, even though you're pretty sure they'll be fine. But still, you have an emotional reaction. When it happens 5 episodes later, or 5 chapters later, or when it happens in the next book, and again, and again, and again, and again, you're gonna lose your tension. That's not a way to build tension. It's like cursing. I don't curse a lot on this video blog, but if I was dropping F-bombs every 2 seconds, then it loses any humor, it loses any impact, it loses any sense of passion behind it. So less is more really is a good rule to follow in any form of storytelling. So when you are creating a world, give yourself those limitations, and when that causes a knuckle, is that a phrase? When it causes a wrinkle in your storytelling, find a way around it. Try your darndest first to find a way around it using your storytelling muscles before you just go back and erase it and say, never mind, that rule doesn't apply and I need to take that rule out. My book series that I keep teasing you about, that isn't out yet and doesn't have a release date yet, Afterworld, with book 1 Ophelia, I hit that wall at the end of the first book because I had given myself too much freedom and too much power with playing with this one element that is different from everyday life. And it was very convenient to the story, but it wasn't convenient for the next 3 books. It wasn't convenient for limiting a character's ability. It's the same issue I have with Superman. I mean, why do I care about Superman? He's like invincible, okay, kryptonite, whatever. But you know, if Superman can get chucked through a building and be perfectly fine, then he loses his humanity. We are drawn to vulnerability. Make your characters vulnerable, kids. And think of the most intimate moments that you have shared with another human being. It is when you've taken the risk to make yourself vulnerable, or they've taken that risk, and you've been rewarded for it because you were accepted or you were loved. Or maybe you were rejected, and that helped you find your way in life in terms of knowing that you can't trust that person, or building a thicker skin. We need to do this in our storytelling as well. And we need to remember that when you make a character vulnerable, when you make them have limitations, when you make your world have limitations, the stakes are higher. And your readers will then be more invested in the story you're telling and the characters you're telling. And I realize this is, again, no surprises here, going away from the main question at hand, but I think that it is related because world building to me is adding exciting, imaginative elements with rules. And you've got to stick to those rules. I was afraid of sticking to my own rules with my Afterworld series. That's why I wrote all the books in at once before I released the first one. Well, before I do release the... whatever. Tenses. Who needs them? Plus those stories are it's basically one big fat book because they're so related. But anyway, I haven't released the first book that I ever wrote that I keep referencing in this vlog yet because it is part of a series, and like I said, it is set in a different version of reality, and as such I want to make sure I tell the story fully and that all the rules apply, and that I haven't painted myself into a corner in book 1 or book 2 before I get to book whatever. So unless you're really sure of where you're going, and again, this is where the people who actually plot and plan things out, like I don't, you'll probably be in a better position to be able to make that assessment and say, yes, okay, I am ending the power of magic here, or whatnot, because of, I know what's going to happen in my next books. For example, Harry Potter. I'm always like, I want to ask J.K. Rowling all these questions. Okay, so I'm a wizard, right? Use my wand. And I'm just sitting in my room and I really want a chocolate bar, but I don't have a chocolate bar in my room. Can I conjure a chocolate bar? Or, okay, transfiguration. I want to transfigure my coffee mug into a cat. How does that work? Sure, there's carbon in this, but there's a bunch of elements missing. There's a bunch of material missing that it could be a cat-shaped ceramic, but how can it actually be transfigured into a cat? Like, the raw material has to come from somewhere, so is it sucking the rest of that material from my room, from the air, from my body? I mean, these are the questions that I have for J.K. Rowling. And that's why I appreciated in the books The Inheritance Cycle, I liked that when Aragon used magic, it was at a personal cost to him. So if he did some big powerful spell, he felt a little tired after that because it actually took something out of him, just like any form of activity, physical activity, mental activity, whatever. So those were limitations placed on it. And Harry Potter, it's like, come on, I love Harry Potter, but I mean, the dude's got broken glasses. The dude wears glasses. With all these spells, they couldn't just fix his eyes. They're limits that... they don't make sense. It's gotta make some modicum of sense. And sure, it's magic, and sure, it's a mythical space, and sure, all that stuff. But, you know, I would be a lot more invested if Like I said, I knew the limits and hence knew the characters' vulnerabilities and knew that they were as vulnerable as you and I, and that you could take a stake to the heart and die. You know, without the risk of death, Superman. Without the risk of serious injury, without the risk of emotional injury, it's hard to connect to a character. At least it's hard for me. It's really difficult for me to invest in someone who's shown themselves impermeable to the things that in my life are extremely dangerous. Like emotional wounding, like physical harm, like fear. So, I don't know how you're going to process all this, but do your best. That all has somehow to do with world building and in world building, character building, because our characters are parts of these worlds. And I apologize for the length of this video blog, but I hope you found it informative, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for watching. Please keep the questions coming, and like I always say, I love answering them and I love my mind being challenged by them and breaking down its own limitations within my world in terms of my existence in this sphere for however long that lasts, till I dive into some crazy writing frenzy again. Which I will say, I was able to write The Watcher in an hour here, 2 hours there, a few little spurts. I was actually able to do it like a, quote, normal person. So I know that I have the ability, and it was kind of an exercise on my part to see if I could write like a normal writer. But there you have it. Do with that what you will. Okay, so from me and my magic crystal wand. Isn't that cool? It was a gift from me from a female wizard friend of mine. She's a dragon whisperer. I will not utter her name here. Her identity shall remain secret. See you guys next time.